Hi, I'm Hayley Scrivenor and I am an author. So Dirt Town is the story of Esther Bianchi, a young girl who doesn't make it home from school one day, and it's kind of about the people around her. So she lives in a small country community, and some of the characters we sort of sit with are not just the investigating officer, so Detective Sergeant Sarah Michaels, who's a Sydney cop who comes in and tries to figure out what's going on, but I also follow her best friend Ronnie, who is really convinced that Esther is fine, but also very determined to kind of bring her best friend home. They share a friend named Lewis, who is hiding a secret, and he knows something about what happened to Esther, or he saw her on the day she went missing, but he can't come forward for kind of his own reasons. And then we also follow Constance, the missing girl's mother, whose life is kind of just falling apart around her. So it's this mix of all these different points of view on what happens when you take someone out of a small community like that and the fallout that happens. And for Detective Sergeant Michaels to understand what's happened, she also kind of has to understand the past of Durton. And that's the thing with the title. So the kids call it Dirt Town, but actually it's the town is called Durton, and it's just one of those things, you know how kids kind of come up with silly names and they catch on and they become what everybody calls it. So it's really about that place. It's about that community and what happens when Esther doesn't come home. I'm with Pan Macmillan, who have been excellent sort of through this whole process and really gotten behind the book. People are telling me they feel like they're seeing Dirt Town everywhere, which is really exciting. It is my very first novel. And I wrote it as part of a PhD, and I hadn't really done any extensive writing before that. I'd had a couple of short stories published. So Dirt Town is it's my first book. And so the book really came from, I started a PhD in creative writing and I was interested in collective narration. So one point of view that I actually haven't mentioned is this group of children from Durton who act kind of like a Greek chorus. So, in a kind of traditional Greek play, a group of people will come on and sort of narrate and kind of comment on the action in a way. And so this group of children were my entry point into the story of Dirt Town, because I was looking at other kinds of collective narration in other stories. So it's really interesting when people choose to narrate together. It's quite uncommon. And it's one of the best things has been getting really positive feedback for that. I kind of thought that would be a bit strange and weird, but I also worked very hard to make it flow. And ultimately it really gives us something, not just to the kind of descriptions of the town and understanding, but they're actually really crucial in unpicking the mystery as well. They help us understand what happened to Esther Bianchi. Yeah, I think when people go through a big event, there's often this sense of having lived through an experience together, and I'm endlessly fascinated by this idea of like us and them. And that's one reason I use this kind of we point of view, but I think everyone kind of defines themselves in relation to other people. And so when you have a story take place in a small town, there's lots of really interesting ways you can kind of explore that. But even my Sydney cop who comes in is really grappling with who people think she is and what people say she is. And that idea is just kind of endlessly fascinating to me, that we create ourselves in response to other people, which is sometimes wonderful and sometimes really awful. If you could choose just one place to visit that you've never been to, where would you go? That's a very good question. I think I was a real history buff in sort of primary school, early high school, and I'd love to go to Egypt, and I've never been there. And that feels so far away, post-COVID. But I think that would just be such, you think about the way a place is layered with everyone who's ever lived there, and going somewhere. I mean, we obviously have a continuous history, one of the oldest continuing civilizations in Australia. But I think when you encounter something as a child, it really imprints on your brain. And so that image of the pyramids, I don't know, that would be really cool, I think. I definitely wasn't, although I when I was writing Dirt Town, although I was lucky in that I started the book as part of a PhD and I had a PhD scholarship. So I was still working and I was doing some casual teaching, which I really enjoy, and other bits of work. But now that I'm contracted to write my second book with Pan Macmillan, they've really excitedly kind of come on board and want me to do this second book. And because I've never written a book in that shorter timeline, I'm taking at least a year off to really try and get the next book well and truly underway. And that sort of already started before this book came out, and I really wanted to have a good draft before I kind of came into this space where you talk to people about the book. Because I think the danger is you start talking about it and it all starts to feel easy and inevitable, like, of course, this was always going to be this wonderful story that everybody loves, when in fact so much of writing is kind of getting to a quiet place where you just follow an idea and you kind of don't listen to the voice that tells you, oh, people won't like this, or people won't I think what people really want from a writer is for them to go to a place that only they can go. And I think you kind of need to do that in a bit of a vacuum. So I'm looking forward to, I love book tour. It's so much more fun than writing. Meeting people, talking to people who've read the book is a lot of fun. But I am also looking forward to getting back to that quiet sort of space in my study and delving back into this new story that I'm also really excited about. There are so many people that are involved in Dirttown, and I think I probably have the world's longest acknowledgements in my book. And I always love flipping I often read the acknowledgements first when I read a book because I just love thinking about all the layers and all of the things that go into making a book possible. So for me, it was obviously people like my PhD supervisor, but I've had so many friends very generously read the book, give feedback. And then you get to the point where, for example, I was shortlisted for the Kill Your Darlings Unpublished Manuscript Award, and that came with a sort of editorial development with Rebecca Stafford, who works there. And that was just so amazing when someone who just comes in and can really articulate what your book is doing to you and see it with a clarity and really spend that time with your words. I feel like I've gone through that process so many times. So many people have their fingerprints on Dirttown. And then, of course, my wonderful agent and then publishers. The editorial process for this book has actually been my favourite part. As much as it's difficult to kind of often to make a book as good as it can be, you need to sort of almost unpick all the work you've done. And because there's so many points of view in this book, when you change one thing, there's all these knock-on kind of effects. But I'm so glad that I had people pushing me further than I kind of could have ever gone alone, because I think the book is better for it. So I'm really, it's a group effort. It's quite funny to me that only my name is on the front because it's been such a long process where I've gotten a lot of help from a lot of people. I hate waiting for phone interviews because I don't like phone calls in general. I'm a texter and I love talking to people in person, but there's something about waiting for a phone to ring. And my last couple of radio interviews have kind of like fallen through. They haven't, so I'm sitting there like waiting for it to call and it hasn't rung. So that would probably be my least favourite. But that's it. There's not much to not love about having a book come into the world. It's pretty cool. So I started volunteering for my local writers' festival because I had this sense that I wanted to be around books, and I was working full time, but I just thought I'm going to kind of meet bookish people and that will be good. And I think I'd always had this sense that writers had passed some kind of exam at some point, or someone had come along and given them like a magical star stamp, and that meant you could be a writer. And then when I was volunteering with the festival and meeting more writers, I realised in the best possible way that anyone can kind of, you have to grant yourself entry into that space. And once you start to take it seriously, that is kind of the prerequisite that every writer has to pass through. Everyone who wants to write a book has to have an incredible amount of self-belief that they kind of borrow, steal, fake, until they get to the point where the story has something to offer other people. And in my case, that took really years to really get to the point where the novel was kind of in the version it was now that my publisher picked up. But that sense of how you keep yourself going before that is, I think, something every writer has to grapple with. You have to believe in it long before you can bring other people into your story. Are you a planner or a seat of your pants writer? I always love this question because I'm a total pantser. One thing I would say is that very early in the piece, I knew I wanted to write this chorus, this, collective. And so I was writing from the point of view of these children, and I kind of had this sense of if they're all talking together, something's happened to them. They've gone through some experience that makes them want to talk together. And so that as a kind of flash from the blue, I knew that a girl had gone missing, and I also knew who had killed her. And that's not a spoiler because that's in the sort of first page or two of the book. So it was almost like I had this lighthouse that I was heading towards. I knew, and I think it dictated a lot of things about the book that I didn't even really think about. Things like the kind of plot that it was probably going to have. If your end point is like, we are going to find out what happened to this girl, then I think the story kind of coheres around that. And I always wanted a plot that really dragged the reader through. I wanted them not to be able to put it down. And so this idea of having that lighthouse and heading for it, but then the only way I seem to be able to productively move forward is to kind of just let everything be a bit of a mess and kind of go deeper and deeper and deeper into the characters until I know who they are. And then it's really amazing as things start to connect up. So you kind of are writing scenes, you're not sure what they're for. And then suddenly they'll either find a place, or you'll learn something about the character through writing that scene that then dictates what's kind of going to happen. And I would say I'm a character writer. I read for voice and character. And I think when the plot is an extension of who the people in your book truly are, that's when you offer something really special to the reader. I do, and I think sometimes it's escapism. I want to just hang out in someone else's world. Sometimes I read to just be inspired, just to go, wow, this is such an amazing thing. You can arrange words on paper and create a feeling in someone, and it's nice to just affirm that sometimes. But also sometimes I'll read in a really pointed way. So one of my characters, Lewis, is a young boy with an abusive father, and so I read quite a bit of Karl Ove Knausgård, the Norwegian writer. He had an abusive father, and he wrote these big fat books of memoir, which I actually love. I devoured them and reread them all in lockdown, and I think I've read book 6 about 4 times, which is just my own weird thing. But but he writes sort of really beautifully about that. And so I feel like it was you kind of take a character and think, okay, what do I want to think about? And you can kind of tailor your reading sometimes. Although at certain points in editing, I just wanted to read for fun. I just wanted to just not be in the world of my story for a while. Well, a book I recently finished because I did an event with her last night in Melbourne is Emily Spurr's A Million Things, which is this completely insanely beautiful book told from the point of view of a 10-year-old girl named Ray who lives with her dog Splinter, and he's also a massive character in the book. And I guess I have children narrators in my book, and so reading that book and really just stepping back and going, wow, this is such an achievement of language. It takes children and their emotions so seriously, but it holds everything with this beautiful lightness that children also have, I think. So you really, by the end, have just been kind of pulled apart and reassembled by Emily Spurr, and I love that book. The book that I'm going to get in the airport on my way home is Eleanor Limprecht's The Coast. I've read previous books of hers and just will read everything she writes forever and ever. So that's my next, that'll be on the plane on the way home. So the next book is not a Dirt Town follow-on. It's not a sequel. I may return to Detective Sergeant Sarah Michaels one day, but not for this book, because I found characters that I really resonate with in a place that I'm really excited about. So like Dirt Town, it's like someone will be dead very early in the opening, and I think that really gives me a sense of impetus and life or death stakes that I as a writer really enjoy, and that I think readers of Dirt Town will be hungry for more of after they read Dirt Town. But I also think it's really important that you follow, as I said, your own what you feel you have to say and what you are kind of interested in following. So it'll be another small community, but it won't be another dry kind of dry town in the same way that Dirt Town is. But this small community and this idea of, I always want the way that I'm telling the story and the point of view that I use to elevate and kind of enrich the story that I'm telling, if that makes sense. So it won't be a lot of voices again, but I've really thought about who's narrating and why they're narrating in that way. And so I think that deeper thematic richness combined with a cracker plot, ideally, are kind of going to come together in book 2. That's the hope. Oh, thank you for having me. So wonderful and I love the mystery questions. It's very exciting for me.